By approaching public higher education from a global perspective in terms of the different dimensions that neoliberalism impacts, or by approaching it by focusing on the key principles of neoliberalism, by which I consider to be radical individualism, limited government, and the mechanisms associated with that, and those are privatization, deregulation, and the anti-tax movement, and then also flexible labor. And I think all of those different dimensions are brought to bear not only in higher education but across society, and essentially reduce society to a set of market transactions. So we really have to stand up actually and defend society. You know, Foucault had a book some years ago that was titled "Society Has to Be Protected" or "Needs to Be Protected," a title which I really love. And I think a title that really should concern us today, because neoliberalism literally is reducing society to a set of market transactions. And I like to think that human progress and human life is much more than a set of market transactions, or even more than just what the economy has us do. It's about fulfilling the potential of our faculties as human beings. And I'd like to bring the conversation back to that. You know, public higher education is that vehicle by which all members of society have an opportunity to develop their human potential, to develop their faculties, whether it be in aesthetics, whether it be in technology, or whatever. And I think we need to restore that as a public good. And you know, all the themes that came out of the conference, you know, one can look at, you know, one particular dimension or broader dimensions and so forth, but all of them, I think, coalesce and revolve around the fact that we need to create a society, or at least restore a society, that gives members a much broader set of opportunities to develop their human potential.
I think many of us believe that the academy was always designed to be protected from being buffeted by the winds of other changes in society, that it was somewhat of a cloistered environment. And it seems it is no longer, if it ever was, unaffected by these trends. How are the ways in which neoliberalism is impacting the academy?
Well, you know, it was never fully protected, but it had been to a great extent protected relative to where we are today. Neoliberalism basically says, through the principle of radical individualism, that everyone ought to take care of themselves and their families. And that translates, when it comes to higher education, to the viewpoint that it is the individual who benefits from the college experience, so the individual ought to pay for it. And so lost there is really the public interest. We lose that whole aspect of having an informed citizen and an educated citizen having a vision of a society, of a good society that gives people an opportunity to develop their potential. And it also reduces it in terms of finances, because if it's a private good for the individual, then if the individual ought to pay for it, then they have been, through the anti-tax movement, mobilized an anti-government perspective, claiming that government is the problem, and as such ought to be reduced because it reduces freedom, they claim. And in fact, you know, the education has to be supported. If we're going to have a public education system, it has to be supported by the taxpayers. And the taxpayers are, in fact, the ones that pay for it. So in a sense, we pay for it in relation to the public good which we're trying to achieve. It also, I think, undermines the opportunity for students to be able to go to college, because if you cut revenues from the public side, then you have to raise tuition, and you know, increasing tuition I think dissuades many people from going to college. They simply cannot afford it. It has impacted it by giving rise to this for-profit private sector of colleges, which really, you know, provide what I would call a questionable set of educational experiences, and which, you know, as we privatize many of our government functions and support these private entities, the government, or the legislators, I should say, never really created the monitoring mechanisms by which we, the public, would be assured that they would be good stewards. And in fact, we know that they are not good stewards. We're finding out every day, whether it be in private prisons, in private schools, in charter schools, or in these for-profit institutions, that there are not all great stewards of our public funds. All we've done is really transferred public funds over to the private sector, and we're not really getting the return that we should be getting for it. It also has led, through the principle of flexible labor, led to the increase of part-time faculty. There's this attack on tenure, which is actually based on the principle of academic freedom, that we should be able to study all aspects of society, that there's no area that should be hands-off, if you will. And the effort really is to reduce higher education, at least the public sector of it. I don't believe in the private sector, particularly the Ivy Leagues, that same principle holds, is to reduce it to an educational experience that develops workforce skills. And we really need to go back to the liberal arts model that developed educated persons, that produce what we would believe to be an educated person. And by reducing the number of tenured faculty, you have the increase in part-time faculty, and we know that these are faculty members who are not well paid. Many of them live at the level of poverty. They have to receive government benefits in order to make it. And in California, they call them freeway flyers. They're running from one institution to another. And the quality of education, just because of the lack of support provided to them, simply cannot be equivalent to that of a tenured professor who receives the support of the institution. So I think there's a lot of dimensions by which public higher education has been undermined.
Where do academics get their hands on the lever of power to change it? Is it by educating others, or do they have access to the power that it's going to take to turn that battleship around?
I think the faculty really need to understand and become aware of what's happening. I talk to a lot of my colleagues across the country, at my own institution and so forth, and they have this sense of unease. They understand that something's not quite right, something's not moving in the right direction here, but they really haven't taken the time to really get a hold of the perspective that will help them understand what's going on. So I think the first step is really that. And to a great extent, that's why we organized this conference, because we wanted to break the silence. There isn't really a public discussion going on about what's happening to public higher education today. And so I hope that by having done this conference, by having given some voice to the issues, that we can continue to do so. And hopefully, the power really lies with the faculty, with the senior faculty, who need to, one, recover their fair share of faculty governance. It has been basically usurped through the bureaucratic structures, and they need to recognize and understand that they own the university, not in terms of property ownership, but in terms of its purpose and mission and its standards and quality.
What are the next steps now that the conference has ended? What is on the agenda, and what do you think needs to happen next, both here and elsewhere?
Well, I think we need to continue to develop networks among faculty who understand what's going on, to find ways to continue the research and show how the policies and practices of neoliberalism are impacting higher education, and hopefully be able to come up with a vision or alternatives by which we can move forward. It's not going to be an easy task. We've been experiencing this type of change now for 40 plus years, and it's taken us this long to get here, and still many of us don't understand what's happening to higher education. So hopefully we can build a broad network that people will assume the ownership of the institution and say, okay, we need to restore it to what it should be, and that is an institution that provides opportunities for members of society to become more fully human.
This is unfolding against a backdrop of the digital revolution that is disrupting a lot of institutions, including higher education. It can be a blessing or a curse. In one sense, we're seeing the sort of online university model where there are basic job training courses offered for guaranteed student loans. That's one model that sort of worries people on the one end of the spectrum. At the other end, is it possible for scholars to band together and create new models in that new digital realm that would maintain the values that you would like to see maintained?
Well, I think there's a possibility there, but I think the technology may not serve all students equally. I am particularly concerned of students who are not from Western cultures. Let's say that they're from high-touch cultures as opposed to high-tech cultures. And as the demographic shift continues to unfold here in this country, we see more and more people from those cultures. And I think we're going to have to maintain a good amount of face-to-face instruction, both for people who come from other cultures, but also, I think, from the working class and the working poor, who really don't understand these institutions, who have not been given good educational backgrounds. We need to work much more directly with them. And I think after a certain level of proficiency, at the higher levels of proficiency, students can probably benefit greatly from the technological presentation of information and the educational modules that are made available to them. And maybe the transition in between those two are blended or hybrid models and so forth. But ultimately, we have to, tailor these kinds of educational experiences for particular types of audiences or students, if you will.
In the upcoming election, we expect inequality to be a driving issue, and we see both parties trying to embrace that as we have the answers in order to be able to deal with the issue of rising inequality. Education, higher education in particular, has always been the ladder up for people who come from lower socioeconomic conditions. But they feel, I think, they've been priced out of the market. Are there any political solutions on the horizon that academics need to mobilize around?
Well, I think putting a hold on tuition increases is important, because the further it goes up, the more it goes up, the more difficult it is going to be to bring in the segments from the lower socioeconomic statuses in society. I think that's one place to start. But I don't really hear the politicians talking about solutions. I hear them talking about something needs to be addressed or something needs to be discussed, but they don't broach the discourse, in a way that's meaningful, and they don't provide any solutions. I think it's just the usual manipulation of the electorate to gain favor, and not really providing any pragmatic solutions. So it's really going to be up to people outside the political arena to come up with some solutions and then push to get them implemented in some way.
Will academics preside over the death of the public education, or document it in their research, or will they be able to stop its death?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure. At the conference, there was this discussion about where we were with neoliberalism, and I think, from my point of view, I believe that we have passed that tipping point where it is now the predominant form of government, if you will, of political climate and so forth. That doesn't mean that it is not, that we are not able to transform it or to change it or to halt it. But we need to have a vision, and I think that's what's missing, and that's what I hope will come from people who are looking at this. Because yes, we have been looking at the negative effects of neoliberalism, but we have not been looking critically at the possibility. In other words, where are the cracks where the light comes in and lets us see possibility? And I think that's where we need to go next.